Good day and welcome back to another DBZ Dokkan Metal video. In this video I want to take a look at essentially the concept of a second slot unit. So now what makes a second slot unit good? What makes a second slot unit like firstly a second slot, and what differentiates it from a third slot unit and a first slot unit? So first slot units, as I've covered already, are more tankier units, more defensively orientated. A lot of the times players like them because their start of turn defense or damage reduction is very high, which enables them to take super attacks before they fire off their own. And this is a very important part to the slot 1 mechanic. Slot 2 units do still need to be relatively strong defensively. They can still have guard, they can still have damage reduction, they can still have evasion, they can have all these things. However, a lot of the times you're a little bit more lenient on the conditional factors behind those. So for example, they can have great defense after super. Some events do AoE attacks, do cause problems, of course that is understandable, but generally speaking the second slot unit needs to be a little bit less, or can be a little bit less reliable defensively, whilst being much more dominant offensively. Priorities for second slot units also include, generally speaking, units that require turns to activate their abilities. So a great example of this is the Trunks. So he's probably the perfect example of a second slot unit in his entirety. Trunks is a unit that gains damage reduction on every single attack that he does. Trunks raises his defense on his super. Trunks raises his defense with super attacks. Trunks also raises his ability to do attacks and to activate his skills by the amount of turns that he's out on the field. So Trunks is a unit that you want to prioritize having a lot in your lineup, but you also can't really place him in the first slot. And this gives you an example of the kind of unit that you're looking for. It's not to say that Trunks is bad defensively, but there's very much a clear difference between a Trunks after 3 supers and a Trunks before 3 supers, and I think everyone can understand that. A similar unit in the same vein and the same class and the same kind of design is Ultimate Gohan, which is in functionality a pretty similar unit. Again, a unit that can have pretty good start of turn defense. He even has guard for the beginning of battle. But generally speaking, he becomes slightly less reliable at tanking as it goes a bit later on, and you're more than likely to place him in the second or third slot. Now it's a very malleable position. A unit that's good in the second slot is probably also going to be okay in the third slot. But there's a couple of things you want to keep your eyes out for. Firstly, how long do they take to build up? This is an important factor. Units like AGL LR Gohan and units like Strength Final Form Cooler require multiple attacks to get to their max speed. And generally speaking, units like Physical Piccolo are units that gain attack and defense on super. And because of how the calculation for defense occurs, this is actually very important from a multiplicative standpoint. So what this means is ultimately at the end of the day, units that gain attack and defense on super are also priority units for the second and third slot. So what do we know? We know that second slot units need to be more offensively orientated. They don't need to be as defensively powerful, although they still need to be rather strong defensively after super. We know that second slot units traditionally either have the ability to gain attack and defense per turn or require multiple attacks to get to their full power, or they gain attack and defense upon super, which significantly improves their after super tanking effects. So those are kind of clear signs. Other great signs, and it's not to say that a unit that's a second slot unit cannot provide support or anything, but another great sign is, generally speaking, units that gain functionality after a certain amount of time. A great example of this is, for example, Cooler, who I think is also a great example of a second slot unit. After a certain amount of attacks, he just guarantees another set of attacks. He also builds up his attack and defense with every single attack, and these are very crucial mechanics when you're trying to get Cooler to really get to his full power. Placing Cooler in the third slot as a floater and comparing it to a Cooler that's exactly the same but placed in the second slot is a very different entity. The speed at which they build up is considerably different, and this is a great example of the difference between a second slot priority unit and a third slot unit. Some units are great as floaters. Gogeta and Tech Vegito are great examples of units that are excellent floaters who become fantastic second slot units later on, but also can remain excellent floaters because they only take 2 or 3 attacks to fully build up. Whereas our good friend Cooler, he takes 19 attacks, well, not really, he takes 10 attacks to fully build up, and so you kind of want to make sure that he gets those done. Yes, there are periods where he'll do 3 in a turn, but generally speaking, he needs at least 3 or 4 turns out there, and if you float him, you're not going to have that same effect with a turn 9 Cooler that's not hitting the same. A lot of units are second slot units, so it can be a bit finicky. But ideally, look for units that are strong after super and take it from there.